The morning sun had barely risen when the shouting began. Chickens scattered across the dusty courtyard, children froze mid-play, and doors swung open as villagers poured into the path leading to the market square. At the center of it all stood Amina, her hands trembling, her breath caught in her throat as two guards gripped her arms roughly. Her wrists were wrapped in iron chains that clinked with every movement, a sound that cut through the murmurs and gasps around her. She was known throughout the village as one of the most hard-working women, the one who rose before dawn to grind millet, who helped the elderly fetch water, who taught the little ones how to shape clay pots in the shade. But that morning all those years of goodness meant nothing. The whispers had already decided her fate. "They say she stole from the chief's storehouse," one voice hissed. "Money meant for the new well." "Impossible," another argued weakly. "Amina would never." But the crowd's noise drowned any defense. It grew like a storm, unstoppable, directionless, fueled by rumor and fear. Her accuser stood tall before her, a man wrapped in fine cloth, his smile sharp as a knife. He was one of the chief's trusted traders and his word carried weight. "We found her near the storeroom," he declared, voice booming. "The coins were gone. Who else could have done it?" Amina shook her head, her voice breaking. "I was cleaning, not stealing. I didn't even know," but her protest was cut short when one of the guards yanked her forward. The cold metal tightened against her wrists, biting into her skin. The crowd murmured again, some with pity, others with satisfaction. The old women at the edge of the square whispered prayers under their breath. "O ancestors, see the innocent," one of them muttered, tears gathering in her eyes. But others turned away, afraid of standing against power. It was easier to believe the lie than question the man who spread it. Amina's eyes darted around, searching for someone, anyone, who might defend her. But her friends avoided her gaze. Her family stood still, confusion written across their faces. She had no words left. Her throat felt tight, her heart pounding with a helpless rhythm. The trader leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You should have known your place," he said softly. "Now you'll learn." The smugness in his tone chilled her more than the chains. The guards began to drag her through the crowd. Dust rose under their feet, swirling like smoke. Children stared wide-eyed, clutching their mothers' wraps. "A thief," someone muttered. "She fooled us all." She stumbled once, nearly falling, but caught herself. The ground beneath her seemed to tilt, her world collapsing into disbelief. Every heartbeat screamed this is wrong, yet the village, the place she had called home, looked at her like a stranger. When they reached the end of the market path, she turned once more toward the people who had known her since childhood. Her voice was hoarse but clear. "I did not take what is not mine," she said. "The truth will come." But her words were met with silence. Even the wind seemed to pause, heavy with judgment. Then a drumbeat echoed from the chief's courtyard, signaling the order. The accused was to be taken away. As they led her toward the small prison at the edge of the village, Amina lifted her eyes to the sky. Clouds gathered above, pale and uncertain. In that moment she felt both broken and defiant. The chains around her wrists were heavy, but deep within, something refused to bow, a quiet voice that whispered, "Truth does not die even when chained." The door of the prison creaked open with a sound that sliced through the morning air, long and hollow, like the groan of something ancient. The guards pushed Amina inside without a word, and she stumbled forward, landing hard on the cold earth. The room was small and damp, built from rough stones that wept moisture. A single shaft of light pierced through a hole near the ceiling, painting a faint golden circle on the dirt floor, the only trace of the world outside. As the door slammed shut behind her, the sound of iron locking against iron echoed through her chest. It was the sound of abandonment. The guards' laughter faded down the corridor, replaced by the rhythmic drip of water from the cracked roof and the faint scurry of rats in the corner. The smell was thick, a mixture of old sweat, rust, and despair. Amina sat still for a long while, trying to breathe past the knot of fear in her throat. Her wrists ached from the chains that still bound them. Her palms were swollen, skin rubbed raw from the struggle earlier. She could still hear the crowd's voices in her head, the murmurs of betrayal, the disbelief in her mother's eyes. The village had cast her out like a shadow no one wanted to claim. When footsteps echoed outside her cell, she flinched. One of the guards stopped at the small window in the door, a jagged hole barely large enough to pass food through. "So," he sneered, "the thief still breathes?" He dropped a bowl of watery porridge onto the floor. "Eat or starve. The chief doesn't care which." The bowl hit the ground with a splash, spilling half its contents onto the dirt. Amina didn't move right away. Her stomach twisted in hunger, but her dignity held her still. "I am not a thief," she whispered. The guard only chuckled and walked away, humming a song about liars and punishment. Night came quickly in that cell. The air grew colder, thick with the hum of insects outside and the distant croak of frogs from the riverbank. The moonlight slipped weakly through the hole in the ceiling, washing her in silver shadows. Amina pulled her knees to her chest, pressing her forehead against them. She tried to pray, but the words trembled on her lips. "Oh ancestors," she whispered, "if you can hear me, remind them of who I am. Let truth walk where I cannot." Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking into the silence. "Do not let lies live longer than light." Her prayers became her rhythm, her breath. Every night, she spoke them into the darkness as if the stones themselves might carry them out to the world. Sometimes she heard the guards laughing outside, telling stories about her. "They say she cried for her mother all night," one would say. "No," another replied mockingly, "she's plotting how to steal again once she's free." Their words cut deep, but she refused to respond. They wanted her broken, voiceless. She would not give them that. Days blurred into each other. She marked time by the changes in light, by the way her shadow shifted across the floor. She learned the language of silence, how to listen to the world beyond the walls. Once she heard children playing outside and recognized their laughter. It pierced her heart like a blade. Somewhere life continued as if she had never existed. Yet beneath the despair, something else began to stir, something small but unyielding. Each morning she forced herself to stand. She straightened her back even when her body trembled. She cleaned her corner of the cell, arranged the broken bowl neatly, whispered her name aloud so it would not vanish into the dark. "I am Amina," she said softly one night. "I am not what they call me. The truth sleeps, but it does not die." The walls did not answer, but she imagined they were listening. Perhaps the ancestors were too. And though the world outside might have forgotten her, she would not forget herself. Her chains might hold her hands, but they could not bind her will, not the part of her that still believed that one day the light would find her again. The days passed in a blur of hunger, darkness, and despair. The young woman sat on the cold floor of her cell, her hands still bound, her wrists raw from the iron. Outside her cell, footsteps echoed, guards laughing, mocking her name. They called her a thief, a liar, a traitor. But she no longer answered them. She had learned silence was safer than begging for mercy in a place where mercy had no meaning. Every night, she whispered prayers into the straw beneath her head, asking the ancestors to grant her strength or at least peace. But what came instead was the soft scrape of a wooden bowl across the floor. The jailkeeper, an old man with trembling hands and hollow eyes, always slid her food without a word. Sometimes he lingered. His shadow stayed in the doorway, unmoving, before he shuffled away again. At first she hated him as much as the rest. To her, he was just another face behind her suffering, another silent witness who chose obedience over truth. But one night, as rain lashed against the iron bars and lightning tore through the sky, she saw him pause. The light from his lantern revealed something she hadn't noticed before, a sadness deeper than age, a weariness that came from carrying too many secrets. "Why do you look at me like that?" she asked, her voice hoarse from days without speech. The old man didn't answer. He only set the bowl down and stared at the wall, as if the stones themselves carried his guilt. When he finally spoke, it was a whisper barely louder than the wind. "They said you confessed," he muttered. "But I've seen eyes of the guilty before. Yours, they don't carry that weight." She blinked through tears. No one had spoken to her with kindness since her arrest. For a long time neither spoke again. But something fragile had shifted in that silence, the beginning of an understanding neither fully dared to name. Days turned into weeks. The jailkeeper began to leave her scraps of bread, bits of fruit. He mended the leak in her roof. Once, when she shivered uncontrollably from fever, she woke to find a blanket draped across her shoulders, rough but warm. She knew it was him. And slowly she began to tell him her story. About the papers she had been asked to deliver, the signatures she didn't understand, and the powerful man who had framed her when the truth began to surface. The old jailkeeper listened quietly, his fingers gripping his lantern tighter with every word. When she finished, he stood there for a long time, silent as stone. "There are things," he said finally, "that are too dangerous to speak aloud. But truth does not die just because it's buried." That night he didn't lock the outer gate. He left it slightly ajar, not as an invitation but as a sign that he believed her. In that small act of defiance, the first spark of hope flickered in the darkness. From that day forward, they no longer saw each other as prisoner and guard. They were two souls caught in the same web, one bound by chains, the other by duty. And though neither knew it yet, their fragile bond would soon unravel a secret powerful enough to shake the entire village. That night the cell was unusually quiet. The wind had died, the rain had stopped, and only the faint dripping of water echoed through the corridor. She couldn't sleep, not after days of restless dreams and the echo of the old jailkeeper's words, "Truth does not die just because it's buried." She sat up, her fingers tracing the damp stones beneath her. The cell was old, perhaps older than the village itself. Its walls had seen hundreds of souls come and go, some guilty, some forgotten. As she pushed aside a clump of straw to clean her corner, her nails caught on something jagged. Curious, she dug gently, scraping away layers of dust until she felt a loose stone shift beneath her touch. Her pulse quickened. She pried it free, revealing a narrow hollow in the wall. Inside were scraps of something that should never have been there, old, torn papers, curled from moisture and time. She pulled them out carefully, her chained hands trembling as she spread them under the faint lantern glow that leaked through the bars. The writing was faded but legible. Names. Dates. Seals stamped with red wax, the same crest that adorned the offices of the village council. Her eyes widened as she read the words scattered across the fragments: transfer of land ownership, confidential payment, signed by Chief Nadazi, and then her own name scrawled near the bottom of one sheet, forged in handwriting she didn't recognize. She gasped. These weren't random papers. They were evidence, documents tied to the deal she had been accused of stealing from. But the seals, the signatures, they proved something else, that the crime wasn't hers at all. The real culprit was someone powerful enough to rewrite the story and bury the truth beneath her cell. For a long moment she couldn't breathe. The weight of realization pressed down harder than her chains. She held the papers close, her heart pounding in the dark. Every memory of her arrest came flooding back. The shouting, the crowd, the chief's accusing glare. And now she saw it clearly. The fear in his eyes that day hadn't been anger. It had been desperation. She spent the rest of the night piecing the fragments together. Some were too torn to read, others smudged by water. But piece by piece a pattern emerged. A land dispute, bribes exchanged, names of witnesses who had vanished after the trial. And one letter, half-burned, that began with, "If she speaks, everything falls apart." By dawn, she had hidden the papers again, tucking them inside a crack behind the stone. Her thoughts raced. If anyone found out she had them, she would disappear before the sun set. But if she told no one, the truth would rot with her in that cell. When the old jailkeeper brought her food later that morning, she watched him closely. His eyes lingered longer than usual, heavy with unspoken questions. For a moment she almost told him, almost showed him the scraps that could destroy powerful men. But fear won. Not yet, she thought. Not until she was sure he wasn't part of them. That night, when he left, she sat awake again, listening to the quiet hum of the wind outside. The papers whispered to her from the shadows, calling her name like a promise. Somewhere out there, beyond those stone walls, the truth still had breath, fragile, hidden, waiting. And as the moonlight slipped through the bars, painting her chains silver, she whispered back to the darkness, "You buried the wrong person." In that moment, something within her changed. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was the keeper of a secret too dangerous to die, and though the world had bound her hands, it had unknowingly placed the power of her freedom right beneath them. She spent the next few days pretending to be the same silent, broken woman the guards believed her to be. But each night, when the prison fell asleep and only the crickets spoke, she pulled out the torn scraps from their hiding place beneath the stone. Slowly, patiently, she pieced them together, her chains clinking softly as if keeping time with her heartbeat. It was like assembling a broken mirror. Each piece reflected something ugly, something rotten beneath the surface of the village's so-called justice. The papers weren't random at all, they were part of a single set of records from the chief's office. Stamped, signed, and sealed. But not in her name. The first document was a ledger. At the top, in elegant handwriting, was a list of payments, bribes disguised as community support funds. Names stood beside the amounts. One name made her freeze, Obinna, son of Chief Nadazi. Her blood ran cold. Obinna, the same man who had publicly condemned her, calling her a thief without shame. The same man who had smiled as they bound her hands. Another paper, more crumpled and water-stained, looked like a personal letter. It began, "The girl knows nothing. She only carried the parcel. Once she is blamed, no one will look higher." The words hit her like a blade. The parcel, the missing documents she had been accused of stealing, had been a setup from the start. She was nothing more than a scapegoat, an easy sacrifice to protect the powerful. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from anger but from the sheer cruelty of it. All those nights in the cell, the shame, the whispers, the villagers turning their backs, all for someone else's greed. Her trembling fingers traced another page, a receipt signed in Obina's handwriting, bearing the same red seal from the village council. It confirmed payment from a foreign merchant for land that wasn't his to sell. The land had belonged to her late father. That was when everything came together. Obina had forged the ownership papers, sold her family's land in secret, and when rumors began to rise he blamed her, claiming she had stolen the documents to destroy the records. The chief, desperate to protect his son's name, had ordered her arrest. The guards followed orders, the elders turned blind eyes, and the people believed the lie. She leaned back against the wall, breathing hard, her heart pounding in her ears. The papers trembled in her hands, but her mind was suddenly clear. The truth wasn't just hidden, it was buried alive like her. Now she understood why these papers had been left here. Someone, perhaps another prisoner or even a guard, must have tried to hide them long ago before being silenced. The stone had become their tomb and she their unwitting heir. The jailkeeper's lantern flickered through the corridor, and she quickly tucked the papers away again. She could no longer afford to trust anyone. Not yet. The wrong word, the wrong glance could cost her life. But deep inside the fire had been lit. She would not die here. The truth she now carried was heavier than chains, but unlike the iron that bound her wrists, this truth could break walls. As she lay down on the cold floor, she whispered into the darkness, "You took everything from me, but I hold the one thing that can destroy you." Her eyes glimmered with quiet determination. The real criminal's secret was no longer safe. The game had changed, and though she had no weapon, her proof was sharper than any blade. For many nights she could not sleep. The papers were hidden beneath her sleeping mat, their edges cutting faintly into her skin like a constant reminder of the choice she could no longer avoid. Every time the guards passed by, she tensed, imagining they might discover her secret. Every time the jailkeeper brought her food, she wondered if he could sense the storm building in her heart. She had the truth, but truth in her village was a dangerous weapon. When dawn came, thin rays of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the cell wall, touching her face like soft fingers. They should have felt warm, but instead they burned. For the first time she feared not the darkness but what the light might reveal. She could expose the lies, speak the names written on the papers, and destroy the men who had ruined her life. But she also knew what would follow. The chief's guards would silence her before her words reached the crowd. A poor woman's voice had never carried far in a world ruled by men with wealth and influence. That afternoon the jailkeeper came again. Slow steps, the sound of his keys echoing down the corridor. He was an old man, his beard white, his eyes sunken but strangely kind. He slid a bowl of water through the bars and for a moment their eyes met. He saw something had changed in her. "You've stopped crying," he said quietly. "That's not peace I see in your eyes. That's something else." She hesitated, then whispered, "I know who did it." The words hung in the air like smoke. The old man froze. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Child, don't speak such things here. These walls have ears sharper than knives." She stared at him, trembling but determined. "I have proof, names, seals, letters. I found them under the stone." The jailkeeper's face drained of color. He looked over his shoulder, making sure no one was listening. "You don't know what you're saying," he muttered. "If that's true, they'll kill you before you can even open your mouth." "I would rather die telling the truth than live in their lie," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, sitting down beside the bars. For a long time neither spoke. The only sound was the buzz of insects and the distant beat of drums from the village. Finally he said, "I've seen what happens to people who carry truth in this place. They disappear. Their names fade. The powerful bury them deeper than the earth itself." She looked at him, eyes fierce. "Then let them bury me. The earth remembers everything." The old man closed his eyes, pain etched on his face. "You remind me of my daughter," he murmured. She also believed justice had a voice. They silenced her for less. Her heart ached at his words, but it only strengthened her resolve. "I have nothing left to lose," she said. "Not my name, not my freedom, they took it all. But I can still take back the truth." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you truly mean to do this, you'll need to be clever. Truth alone won't save you, it will only draw their wrath. You must make it speak when they cannot silence it. Make it reach ears that even they cannot close." She nodded slowly, understanding what he meant. There were ways, subtle, hidden ways, to let truth slip through cracks like light. Perhaps through a message smuggled out, or through someone in the village still loyal to her family. The idea began to form in her mind, fragile but alive. The jailkeeper stood up, keys jangling softly. Before he left he said, "Be careful, child. The powerful fear truth not because it destroys them, but because it survives them." When he was gone, she sat in the dim light, her chains heavy, her heart heavier still. She knew the path before her was narrow, between silence and death, between cowardice and courage. As night fell, she unfolded the papers once more and stared at the names written in ink that had faded but not vanished. She touched them gently and whispered, "You thought the chains would silence me. But I will make them echo your names instead." And for the first time since her imprisonment she smiled, not out of joy but out of fierce, unbreakable resolve. The choice was made. Truth would no longer sleep beneath the stone. The night of her escape arrived wrapped in thunder. Rain came down like 1,000 small drums beating against the tin roofs of the prison yard, drowning out every other sound. The guards huddled in the gatehouse, their torches sputtering as the wind roared through the trees. It was the kind of storm that made even the ancestors turn their faces from the earth. In the farthest cell she waited, heart pounding like a second storm inside her chest. Every drop of rain seemed to strike the rhythm of her heartbeat. The papers, now tied in a strip of torn cloth and pressed against her chest, felt warm beneath her soaked tunic, the last fragments of justice she had left. She had memorized the names on them, the signatures, the evidence. If the rain destroyed them, she would still carry the truth inside her. Moments later, footsteps echoed in the corridor. It was the old jailkeeper, cloaked in darkness. When he appeared at her door, his face glistened with rain, his beard matted against his neck. He didn't speak. His trembling hands turned the key, and the rusty lock groaned like an old spirit reluctantly waking. The door swung open. For a second she just stood there, unable to move. The open air beyond the bars felt unreal, like something she'd dreamed of too many times to trust. "Go," he whispered hoarsely. "The gods have opened the sky for you. Take your truth and run." She stared at him, tears mixing with the rain. "Why are you helping me?" His eyes softened. "Because I've been silent too long," he said. "And silence makes you as guilty as the ones who lie." Before she could speak, he pressed a small bundle of food into her hands. "There's a path behind the yam fields," he said quickly. "It leads into the forest. Don't look back." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Then she stepped out, her bare feet sinking into the mud, her chains dragging softly in the puddles. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the broken world she was leaving behind. The storm raged harder, as if trying to wash away every trace of her footsteps. The wind tore at her clothes, the cold cutting deep into her bones, but she kept moving. Each flash of lightning guided her forward, a path of fire and light across the soaked earth. Behind her, the old jailkeeper lingered in the shadows, watching as she disappeared into the sheets of rain. He whispered a prayer, not for safety but for her truth to survive where men's lies had thrived. When she reached the edge of the forest, the thunder roared so loudly that the ground trembled beneath her feet. The trees swayed like living guardians, their leaves glistening under the flashes of white light. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Let this storm carry me to justice." Her chains clinked as she climbed through the undergrowth, each sound blending with the rhythm of the rain. In the distance, a river roared, swollen from the storm, and she knew it would lead toward the chief's court in the neighboring village. The path would be long and treacherous, but for the first time in many moons she felt the air of freedom fill her lungs. She paused beneath a great tree, lightning revealing her drenched face, fierce, alive, reborn. The rain poured harder, washing the dirt from her skin, the past from her spirit. It was not just water, it was cleansing. It was the sky's way of saying, "You were never meant to rot in chains." As she vanished deeper into the forest, the storm's fury followed her, not as a curse but as a shield. Every drop that struck her skin whispered of renewal, every thunderclap roared of reckoning. And in that night of chaos, she carried hope like a flame that even the rain could not drown. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and heavy with silence. Mist rose from the soaked earth as if the sky itself was still exhaling from its long night of rage. The woman walked barefoot along the muddy path, her legs weak but steady. The papers, though wet, were still pressed tightly against her chest beneath her torn tunic. Each step toward the chief's court felt like walking into the heart of fire, yet she did not falter. When she reached the village center, people gasped. Farmers setting up their stalls dropped their baskets. Women fetching water froze, their calabashes tilting in disbelief. Children whispered and ran ahead, shouting, "The dead woman walks." The chained one has returned. Within moments, a crowd formed, eyes wide with shock and fear. She kept walking, her wet clothes clinging to her thin frame, her hair tangled, her feet bleeding from the sharp stones. But her gaze was steady, not at the faces staring at her, but at the chief's compound beyond them. The court's drums sounded, 3 low beats, signaling a matter of judgment. Elders, dressed in woven cloth and beads, took their seats beneath the baobab tree where justice was spoken. The chief, a tall man with a grave face, leaned forward. "Who brings such chaos at dawn?" he demanded. The crowd parted and she stepped forward. "I bring truth," she said, her voice trembling but clear. A murmur ran through the villagers. Some whispered her name, others crossed their arms in disbelief. The chief frowned. "You," he said slowly, recognizing her. "You were condemned. You were to remain imprisoned for your crimes. How dare you stand here before this court?" She lifted her head. "Because I was never guilty," she said. "And I can prove it." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. One of them scoffed. "Proof? From the mouth of a prisoner? You speak as though you know better than the law." Her hands shook as she untied the cloth and drew out the damp papers. She placed them gently on the wooden table before the chief. The ink had run in some places, but the seals were still visible, red wax stamped with authority. "These were hidden beneath the prison floor," she said. "They carry the truth your eyes refuse to see." The chief gestured for a scribe to take them. The man lifted the papers carefully, reading the words under his breath. Soon his eyes widened. He read aloud, names, amounts of stolen grain, forged signatures and secret transactions, all tied to the powerful merchant who had first accused her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The merchant, standing among them in fine robes, shifted uneasily. His face drained of color. The woman stepped closer, voice rising now with the rhythm of justice itself. "He took what was not his. When his theft was discovered, he blamed me, a woman with no wealth, no family left to defend her. He used lies and silver to buy my chains." The merchant tried to interrupt, but the chief raised his hand. "Let her finish." Her eyes burned with tears, but her voice grew stronger. "I begged for truth, but no one listened. I prayed in the darkness while the guilty slept in comfort. But the spirits do not sleep. They led me to these papers. They opened the stone beneath my cell so truth could rise again." The scribe continued reading aloud, revealing more, confessions written in the merchant's own hand, proof that he had bribed a guard to hide the documents years ago. The murmurs grew louder until they were no longer whispers but shouts of anger. The merchant fell to his knees. "It was a mistake. A misunderstanding," he cried. But the woman stepped closer, her voice calm and cold. "A mistake is when you drop water on the floor. What you did was evil." The chief stood, slamming his staff into the earth. "Enough." His deep voice echoed through the courtyard. "Let the ancestors bear witness. This woman was chained in lies, but her truth stands free before us. The spirits themselves have spoken through her courage." The elders nodded, shame heavy on their faces. The chief turned to her. "You were wronged by those who swore to protect you. You have faced darkness and returned with light. From this day your name will be cleansed." Tears slid down her cheeks, mingling with the rain that still clung to her skin. The crowd bowed their heads. Some wept, others chanted prayers of forgiveness. She looked up at the sky, its gray clouds breaking apart to reveal streaks of sunlight. "Let truth never be buried again," she whispered. And as the chief's guards dragged the trembling merchant away, the villagers watched her, no longer as a criminal, but as a woman who had faced death and returned with the thunder's strength. Chaos erupted like a long-buried storm bursting through the heart of the village. The moment the scribe finished reading the last line from the soaked papers, silence hung in the air for a heartbeat, then broke into shouts, gasps, and disbelief. The merchant, the man once praised for his wealth and generosity, fell to his knees, his face pale as ash. His voice cracked as he cried out, "They forced me. I wasn't alone. It was the guard, the chief's own advisor. He made me do it." The elders leaned forward, stunned, while the crowd surged with anger. Villagers who once spat at the woman's name now turned their fury toward the true culprit. The merchant's trembling hands reached for the papers as though he could rip the truth back into silence, but the chief's staff slammed down hard on the earth, stopping him cold. "You lied to this court," the chief thundered. "You stained the name of an innocent and twisted the will of justice. Speak now and speak the whole truth, for your next breath depends on it." The merchant stammered, his words tumbling over each other. "It was the advisor. He ordered it, he wanted the land for himself. I only obeyed." His eyes darted toward the old advisor standing among the council. But the advisor's calm mask cracked for the first time. His lips tightened and his fingers twitched at his side. "Lies," the advisor hissed, his voice sharp like a snake's strike. "He forged those papers himself. Do not believe this madness." But before the chief could respond, the old jailkeeper stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. His voice, hoarse but firm, cut through the chaos. "No, my lords, the woman speaks truth. I saw the merchant deliver bribes. I saw him enter the prison at night, hiding what now lies before you." Gasps rippled through the villagers once more. The advisor's face turned gray. He took a step back, but the guards blocked his way. Panic spread through the accused like wildfire, the merchant trembling, the advisor sweating, their lies collapsing under the weight of truth. The woman, still standing barefoot in the mud, watched it all unfold with quiet strength. Her heart ached not with vengeance, but with the raw, heavy relief of being believed at last. The chief raised his hand, silencing the noise. "Bring them forward," he commanded. The guards dragged the merchant and the advisor to their knees beside her. The chief's gaze swept over the crowd, his voice heavy with judgment. "Let all who stand here remember this day," he declared. "When greed blinds the eyes of power, when lies wear the face of truth, the spirits themselves rise to uncover the hidden." He turned to the woman, his expression softening. "Daughter of the soil, we wronged you. The chains that bound you were forged by deceit, not by law." He gestured to the guards. One stepped forward, lifted his blade, and struck the iron shackles that still clung to her wrists. The sound of breaking metal echoed through the court, sharp and final, a sound that carried freedom. The chains fell into the mud, heavy and useless. For a moment, the woman could not move. Her arms hung limp at her sides, her wrists red and sore. Then she lifted them toward the sky, feeling the weight lift from her soul. The villagers began to murmur, not with judgment this time but with awe. The chief faced the two trembling men. "For your crimes, for lies, for greed, for the suffering you caused, you shall face the justice of the ancestors. You will repay every life you darkened with your deceit." The merchant began to weep, his forehead pressed to the ground. The advisor's eyes darted wildly, but he found no allies, no shield left to hide behind. The same voices that once cursed the woman now cried for their punishment. As guards dragged the guilty away, the chief turned back to her. "You stood alone, yet truth stood with you. From this day, your name will be cleansed in every corner of this land." Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were not from pain. The people bowed their heads as she stood tall in the morning light, no longer the prisoner in chains, but the living proof that even in silence, truth waits for its moment to rise. When the court dispersed and the guilty were led away, the woman remained standing in the open yard, her bare feet sinking into the damp soil. The morning sun broke through the clouds, soft and golden, lighting her face as if the heavens themselves had decided to bear witness to what came next. The crowd was still, waiting, watching, unsure of what justice should look like now that truth had spoken. The chief approached her slowly, his staff tapping against the earth. "Daughter," he said, his voice carrying the weight of regret, "you have been wronged in ways that no words can mend. Tell us, what shall be done to those who hurt you? Shall their punishment match your suffering?" The woman lifted her eyes to his. They were calm, steady, and filled with something deeper than anger. She looked beyond the crowd, at the faces that once spat on her name, the hands that had thrown stones, the whispers that had followed her like shadows. Each face now looked away, heavy with shame. For a long while she said nothing. Then, quietly but firmly, she answered, "No punishment can return the days I lost. No pain inflicted on them can cleanse the pain I carried. I do not ask for vengeance. Let them live and see the truth they tried to bury." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Even the chief blinked in disbelief. "You forgive them?" he asked softly. She nodded. "If I do not forgive," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "then their lies will still own me. I will not carry their sins any longer. Let my forgiveness be the ending they did not expect, and the beginning we all need." Her words spread through the people like wind through tall grass, gentle but unstoppable. One by one heads bowed in silence. The same tongues that once spoke against her now whispered prayers for her strength. The chief lowered his gaze, ashamed of the judgment he had once believed. Then from the edge of the crowd the old jailkeeper stepped forward. His back was bent, his beard white with years and his eyes wet with tears. "My child," he said hoarsely, "I held the keys to your chains. I watched you suffer when I should have spoken. I thought justice was beyond my reach. But you have shown me that even in the darkest pit, there is light if one dares to see it." He fell to his knees before her, sobbing. You gave me back my faith in humanity. You showed me that truth is not a weapon, it is a healing fire. Forgive me if you can. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she reached out and lifted the old man's hands. You were the first to doubt the lies, she said gently. You opened my cell when no one else dared. The truth needed witnesses, and you listened. There is nothing to forgive. The old man wept harder, pressing her hand to his forehead. Around them the crowd began to kneel, not in worship but in respect. The chief removed his ceremonial robe and placed it at her feet, bowing deeply. This village, he said, voice trembling, has learned more from your silence and grace than from all our laws combined. May your forgiveness cleanse our hearts and guide our children to better days. The air felt lighter, the tension easing like mist under the sun. The woman stood among them, still fragile from her suffering, yet stronger than any of them had ever been. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Young men lowered their eyes, remembering their cruelty. Even the wind that swept through the court seemed softer, carrying her words into every corner of the land. She turned to leave, her steps steady, her spirit free. As she walked past the old tree near the court gates, she paused and touched its bark, the same tree under which she had been mocked and chained. This time she smiled. We are both still standing, she whispered. The old jailkeeper followed her with his eyes, his tears glistening in the light. May your name never be forgotten, he murmured. And so, as the sun climbed higher, the village found itself changed. Her forgiveness did not erase their guilt, it transformed it. In her quiet strength, they found a mirror for their own hearts. And from that day on, when disputes arose and anger threatened to divide them, elders would say, remember the woman who forgave, and how her mercy healed what punishment never could. Years passed, and the memory of the young woman became woven into the fabric of the village's soul. Children who had not yet been born when she was chained grew up hearing her name spoken with reverence. The tale of the torn papers, found in a dark cell and carried through storm and danger, became more than just a story. It became a symbol of light in the face of deceit. The villagers kept those very papers, now fragile and faded, in a shrine built beside the great tree where the court once gathered. Each fragment, though yellowed with time, still bore the inked marks of names and signatures, proof that lies, no matter how powerful their source, would one day crumble before the truth. Travelers from distant lands came to see them, bowing their heads as elders told the tale of the woman who turned her suffering into salvation. During festivals, the chief's successors would gather the people and retell the legend by firelight. They spoke of the stormy night when she escaped her prison, of her trembling voice before the court, and of how she forgave those who had chained her. Chains, the elders would say, holding up a rusted shackle kept in the shrine, can bind hands but not the truth. The crowd would echo the words as a chant, a promise passed from generation to generation. Mothers told their daughters that courage could be soft yet unbreakable, that even silence could roar when guided by justice. Fathers warned their sons that deceit might win a moment, but truth would win eternity. The woman herself, long gone to the ancestors, became more than mortal. She became a spirit of wisdom, a guardian of fairness invoked in times of dispute. When arguments arose, people would say, "Let the spirit of the chained one guide us." And peace would follow. Seasons turned to decades, and though the ink on the papers faded, their power did not. Scholars copied their story, poets sang of it, and even wandering griots carried it across rivers and deserts. Her name became part of a proverb etched on the shrine's stone wall. Lies may bloom like weeds, but truth roots deep, and cannot die. And so, under the rustling leaves of the old tree, her legend lived on. The papers that once exposed a lie now stood as sacred relics of justice. Every year, when the rains came and the sky rumbled like the night she escaped, villagers gathered to honor her memory. They laid flowers at the shrine and whispered her proverb, knowing that her spirit still watched over them, proof that truth, once found, endures forever.